In 1974, the German Catholic philosopher Josef Pieper published a really interesting essay called Abuse of Language, Abuse of Power. Now, this particular essay is often provided in the form of a book, and you can buy the book if you like. It really doesn't take that long to read, maybe an hour or two if you're a fast reader. And if you want to read it online, you can go to the Internet Archive and download a copy. Just be careful, though, that if you print it, it doesn't always print that well. And when I printed it, all the first letters on the left of the page got cut off. So maybe do a test run first if you're going to go this route. All right, so this is a really interesting essay, I think. You can compare it to something like George Orwell's essay, The Politics of the English Language. It's a kind of reflection on language in relation to power. And if I had to summarize the basic point of this essay, I would say that for Pieper, when language is misused, when people abuse it, it reflects the state of power in that particular country or place. So to put it more succinctly, the abuse of language is a kind of weather vane of the abuse of power. If you live somewhere where you can't say what you want to say, where people lie constantly, where people misuse language and everything is about flattery and rhetoric and things like that, well, you're probably not living in a place where there's much democracy and openness and fairness and things like that. You may even be living in a dictatorship. So that's the basic premise of this book, and what I'd like to do in this video is take you through some of the details so you have a good understanding of what Pieper is arguing. Now, the basic idea then is that we have a language situation, a form of communication. So we have a speaker, right? There's our speaker, and the speaker is going to say something. It's going to be kind of messy here. Ideally, he's going to talk about the truth, and the speaker is going to talk to somebody, the listener, all right? So there's the listener. We'll add a little tag. And ideally, as I mentioned before, it's going to be a truthful kind of comment, and it's going to stand in some relation to reality. We don't just want to say things that are made up, although of course we can create fictions and stories, and that's all totally fine. But in the last resort, there has to be some relationship to reality. So Pieper then suggests that truth is best found within these kind of dialogic situations. It's the connection between people, it's the relationships between people. That's where the search for truth, the quest for truth, really should take place. Unfortunately, in the modern era, this often does not happen. And he suggests that what has happened is that we increasingly have a tribe of what he calls Sophists. Okay, so Sophists, people who abuse language and they use rhetoric instead. So he has a few expressions for this. He calls this the art of persuasion. The art of persuasion. There we go. He refers to this as flattery, and we'll have to come back to that concept in a moment because it's not quite just, saying nice things about people. And he also refers to language as increasingly an instrument of power. So an instrument of power. You want to use your language to dominate, to control other people. And this happens especially, of course, when a dictator uses language. Now, I mentioned the Sophists before, and to understand where he gets this term from, we have to travel back to ancient times. And if we read the works of Plato, Plato critiques the Sophists for using language without really being concerned with ultimate truth. So to give you a quick summary then, Sophists are people who tend to talk impressively. They have a sort of artistry with words. They are guilty of merchandising of wisdom. So in other words, they package wisdom and try to sell it to you. And of course, we have people like that today as well. They also tend to be perfectionist. So rather than be interested in truth and the sort of gritty nature of it, they want everything to be glossy. And that's why Socrates is seen to be kind of ugly, right, rather than handsome. So this sort of not striving for the perfect, but striving for perfectionism, for glossy kinds of finishes. This is typical of the Sophists. When they speak, the word is divorced from reality. This is ultimately a danger to true rational thinking, right, to truth. And there is a kind of nihilism to this. So Gorgias, for instance, the ancient sophist, says nothing is. In other words, there's no normative structure. You can't tell people what to do. You can only focus on how you say things rather than the content of what you have to say. Okay, so that's a quick summary then of the Sophists, and we see these people in modern day life as well, and they are a real danger according to Pieper. Now, just to give you an example here, for instance, we can think of slogans and advertising, and Pieper provides a few examples himself. So a lot of these slogans are kind of empty, right? If you think of the Adidas slogan, for instance, impossible is nothing. What does that really mean if we think about it more closely? So that's an example of this sort of glossy use of language without there always being substance to it. And you can then expand from that and give lots of other examples in the world of entertainment, slogans, politics, all kinds of different arenas. Okay, so what we see then is that increasingly the speaker is not so much concerned with truth and is also much less concerned with the other person, with the listener. Instead of trying to have a real conversation with this person, and instead of being concerned with this person's dignity, right, who they are as human beings, the speaker really just wants to use that person. The person is just there to get something out of. Now, at the same time, the person in this sort of economy of language is also wanting to be deceived. So the person who buys into all of this wants to be deceived, And that doesn't mean that you want no credibility, right? You do want whatever is being said to you to sound plausible, to sound nice, but there's also a part of you that actually enjoys being deceived. So it's an interesting psychological response here. By the way, Pieper at one point, he also talks about lying as part of all of this, but of course it goes beyond this because it's flattery and rhetoric and all these other things. But he actually says that in the case of a lie, we prevent the other person from sharing in reality. So can we really call it communication when somebody lies? Pieper is not so sure because he feels that when you lie, you actually don't really believe in communicating and you cut this person off from reality. So there's something very problematic going on there with lying. Now, the person who is doing all of this has different motivations, and Pieper talks about ulterior motives. A couple of these ulterior motives might be money. Okay, so money and approval. We want approval, we want to feel good about ourselves, and so we start manipulating language and manipulating other people. Of course, we can add power here as well if we like. At first, we might think of this as being just one individual, right? But we can also think of this as much broader than that. So the people who are speaking could be the dictator, could be a special interest group, it could be a clique, a pressure group, a lobby group, can be a revolutionary movement. There are all kinds of groups and peoples who want to use language in order to abuse it. So they have their motivation, but they also play on the motivation and the human nature of the listener. And they try to play on this person's worst tendencies. Things like our interest in sexuality, our pride, our cruelty, our Schadenfreude, which is a German term for the enjoyment of the suffering of others. These are just some examples of the kinds of things that motivate us to believe lies, that make us weak when language is being abused. Pieper also has this nice line here. He says about other types of abuse. He says there are the obsession with slander, right? we somehow enjoy it when other people are made fun of, and this happens in politics a lot. The frenzy to destroy, and the readiness to accept radical answers, to go for the final solution, which is, of course, a reference to Hitler's desire to get rid of the Jews. But you can think of that more broadly as this sense of people who want some quick answer, some easy answer, so that they can say, okay, there's the solution, right? That solves everything. And we see that on all sides of the political spectrum. There are a bunch of specific tactics that people use to flatter others and to persuade others in this negative way. And by the way, I should just mention that flattery here is not just saying nice things about other people. It is really a broader view of language where we use language with the intent to manipulate the other person. And there's often a sense of force or menace to this kind of language. There's some kind of threat behind it as well. If we think then about this whole approach, there are different specific tactics that can be used in order to flatter or to persuade. Let me go through a bunch of these really quickly with you. One of these is surprise. I'm sure you've listened to speakers before who really want to give you this sort of aha moment, right? A lot of TED Talks are like this as well, actually. It's like the one thing you really need to know to understand the whole universe. Another one is singling out one instance. So you focus the spotlight on one particular detail, and if you spend enough time on social media, you'll see lots of this, right? People are posting, drawing attention to one little detail, and then saying this is the key to really understanding something. The sort of opposite approach to this is where we have all details but no big picture. So think of a debate where people are super in the weeds, you might say. They bring all kinds of details to the forefront and they overwhelm you with evidence, but we miss the spirit of it. We miss the big picture. Another tactic is ideological agitation. So this is where you are pushing an ideology very forcefully. It's very clear that you're coming from one angle instead of being interested in the truth as a whole. Pieper also talks about emotionality, bringing too much emotion into things without thinking reasonably. Jargon, we're all familiar with that, and I mentioned Orwell before, who has some really great things to say about this. The language of the revolution, so this is a specific tactic where we really get people excited and we think that the only solution is a radical revolution. And then Pieper adds a couple of interesting ones. He mentions categorical conformism and categorical nonconformism, which I take to mean that some people basically say we have to stick together with this group, this political party, and we have to do everything in consort. Everybody's on the same page. Or the opposite, you get people who reject everything, right? Radical independence. I can't believe anything anybody says. I have to be nonconformist in everything. So those are a bunch of tactics that can be used in order to abuse power. And I've tried to resist giving specific examples because that is sort of part of the spirit of this. I don't want to get sucked into being partisan myself and then being accused afterwards of using Pieper for some kind of political end. Okay, now what can happen over time if there's enough of this kind of abusive language is that much of our reality starts to become a kind of pseudo-reality. So a pseudo-reality is where we really live in a world of lies. Everything almost is a lie. And there is a danger, of course, to using this term, and I don't think Pieper necessarily addresses this. The danger is that some people will basically just generalize too much and say, everything is a lie. The media is always out to deceive us. We're always being tricked. We can't believe anything, right? And that kind of view of pseudo-reality is probably too strong and has its own problems because then you can't trust anything anymore. It's very hard to determine what is actually correct or not. So in a world where there is mostly pseudo-reality, it's very difficult to access the truth. How are we going to have a proper dialogue with others? But there's a larger problem here as well, and this is the last part of the book. This also takes away from the one sphere where we should have absolute freedom to do proper research, and that is the academy. So the academy, the universities, this is where ideally people should be free to research and to do things objectively. So in the academy we should have freedom. Think of intellectual freedom. And we're also going to get science. Okay, science, a sort of objective search for truth. Now, I should add about science that science can become its own ideology, and Pieper warns about this. So if you take, for instance, those who believe in a radical materialism, there's no spirit, there's no soul, there's nothing like that, that is a viable position to hold, of course. But if you then use it to drive certain other views, or you reject any research that people do out of hand because it's different from yours, then you can see how your ideological position, let's say, becomes a real problem in your search for truth. So in the modern world then, the academy is meant to be free and a place for objective research, but that doesn't always happen. And there's a lot of pressure from the outside, right? There's pressure from interest groups, from different political viewpoints to have the research come to certain results and to really establish particular positions. Pieper says you can see this in communism especially, where the party line has to be upheld by all the professors. But ideally, knowledge is not like this, and to provide a different perspective, Pieper goes all the way back to the classics again. Earlier he talked about Plato, now he talks about Aristotle. And he suggests that for Aristotle, the academy is really about knowledge. Okay, so knowledge beyond praxis. That's how we'll summarize this. So think of praxis as like practical ends. The achievement of specific purposes, like, I need to dig a canal, so please do some research in your academy and help me out here. And for Aristotle, knowledge went well beyond this. What the philosopher should do is study knowledge pure and absolute. And that doesn't mean just metaphysical knowledge, it's the totality of reality that is to be studied. And we also have to move then beyond technical exploitation of nature's wealth. It's not just about using nature and resources for your own ends. It's about truth and nothing else. Now, something happens, though, in the modern era that endangers this view of the academy. And by the way, the academy is often referred to as the liberal arts, which really suggests this notion of being free, right? You're liberal, you're free from these outside pressures. But something happens in the modern era that makes science and the search for truth much more closely connected with practical ends. At this point, Pieper provides a few examples. He talks about Descartes, he talks about Dewey, he talks about communism, and he says all of these thinkers and movements, they suggest that knowledge can be used to dominate nature and make use of it. An example might be how in communism you have a 5-year plan. The state is going to organize exactly what is going to happen in the next 5 years, and the universities better comply and support this particular political program. Okay, so we see then that the modern world attacks the academy, and somehow we have to protect it. Somehow we need this intellectual freedom in order to fight against sophistry, to fight against this pseudo-reality that very quickly gets established. And in the 21st century, this is of course even more important, as many people are convinced that the academies have been compromised, that there is no way for people to be objective in those spheres at all anymore. Hopefully that gives you a pretty good sense of Pieper's viewpoint. For him, this is a very serious matter, and it's fitting then that he ends with a brief reference to the thinker Boethius. Boethius in the 6th century He was facing the end of the Roman Empire, the decline of the Roman Empire, and he's in prison. He writes The Consolation of Philosophy, a very famous document, and he's concerned because the human soul increasingly is less free. But for Boethius, even in prison, the soul should strive to remain free, and we should continue to seek for perfection and for truth. So that's Josef Pieper, The Abuse of Language, the Abuse of Power.